I've worked with so many couples over the years where one of the deepest frustrations wasn't about one of the top 3 money, sex, or even parenting. No, it was about something much more foundational than that. I don't feel safe with you. And by safe, we're not talking about physically safe, although that is definitely an issue in some marriages. We're not talking about whether your spouse would protect you in a dark alley. We're talking about emotional safety. Can I come to you with my fears, my disappointments, my worries, my shame, and not be judged, dismissed, or have it used against me later? Think about this. If your spouse comes home after a bad day at work and says, I think I messed up at work today, how do you respond? Do you answer them with empathy and listening or with criticism, problem solving, or even silence? That moment determines whether or not you've created a safe place for your spouse. Welcome back to the High Ticket Woman. I'm really glad you're here because in this episode, we're going to dive into what it means to become a safe place in your marriage. Again, not just physically or spiritually, but emotionally. Because when safety is absent, intimacy shrivels. And when safety is present, intimacy grows in ways that you can't create in any other way. So, what does emotional safety look like? I think we need to start just defining that. So, here's a few indications or markers that you have emotional safety in your marriage. You can express your feelings without fear of being made fun of, mocked, or dismissed. You can share your failures without worrying that they'll be used against you. You can admit doubts, weaknesses, and even frustrations about anything, about even the relationship, without it turning into an argument or a battle. In other words, emotional safety means your spouse trusts that their inner world, head and heart, are safe and protected with you. So, as so much of the time I do, let's look at a scripture. I love this scripture. And even though it's talking about a woman, it applies to both genders. So Proverbs 31, right? We think of Proverbs 31 in terms of the Proverbs 31 woman. And it says in verse 11, the heart of her husband safely trusts her. Just pause for a moment and think about what that's really saying. The heart of her husband, the place of his deepest vulnerabilities, everything that he carries inside of him as a man that makes him feel valued, makes him feel loved, important, needed, special, and vice versa. The heart of a wife safely trusts him. We can easily flip this scripture around, can't we? Does your spouse's heart trust you? That word safely is a powerful word. It's not just about being faithful, fidelity, it's about trust at the deepest level. Can your spouse's heart safely rest in your care? Imagine that your spouse has literally taken their heart out of their chest and handed it over to you and said, "Hold this for me. I trust you with this. I know that you will take the most tenderest care of my heart." That's emotional safety. When emotional safety is present in the marriage, you take more risks in opening up, don't you? Because it's safe. Conflict is still present. It doesn't go away, but it becomes healthier because you can disagree without fear of it damaging the relationship or without fear of being attacked. And intimacy grows because vulnerability is rewarded instead of punished. You can share your scariest thoughts, scariest worries with your spouse and know that it's okay. They may not fully understand, but they're going to listen and they're not going to make fun of you, put you down, criticize you in any way. Now, when it's missing, when emotional safety is missing from your marriage, what does that look like? Well, your spouse is going to withdraw. They're going to hide a part of themselves and they may even turn to others for comfort. And yes, sometimes that can lead to infidelity because they don't, and I'm not justifying that. Hear me when I say that. Nothing justifies an affair, but many affairs come from this place of not feeling emotionally safe within marriage. And so somebody else is now creating that emotional safety, maybe artificial, but it feels really good in the moment and it's missing. It's missing at home. Another thing that happens when emotional safety is missing is that defensiveness and criticism increase. The only place for me to turn when my husband doesn't make me feel safe is for me to be guarded, or as I like to say, to turtle up, right? Pull into my shell, expect the worst, which puts me on edge, which creates defensiveness. I hear everything now through a lens of he means to attack me. He doesn't have my best interest at heart. He's going to judge me. I better not share this. I better hide it. You don't want that. I don't want that. Another thing that happens when you don't have emotional safety is that physical intimacy, sex, the desire for sex often declines because they're tandem, aren't they? Emotional safety and a willingness to open up your body, they go hand in hand, and emotional nakedness feels pretty costly. So, you're not going to be able to be at your most vulnerable physically when there is no safety for emotional vulnerability. Let's talk about some barriers to emotional safety. There are reasons why couples lose this because you may have this in the beginning of your marriage. A lot of us start strong in these areas. We do really well until we don't. So one of the things that happens that creates the loss of safety is criticism. If every confession from our spouse is met with judgment, then our spouse learns that it's not safe to share. So let's give you an example. Let's say that your husband admits to you. Let's say he says, "Ugh, I'm really sorry, honey. I dropped the ball with the kids tonight. I let them stay up too late. Maybe you went out for some reason, and so he had the responsibility of putting the kids to bed, and so he kind of messed up on that." And you say to him, "Are you serious? You can't even handle one evening? I can't ever leave you alone with these kids because you're so irresponsible." Well, what's gonna happen? Well, first of all, he's gonna stop telling you. If he screws up and makes a mistake, he's not gonna tell you because it leads to that. It leads to being judged instead of, compassion and understanding. Another barrier, or a reason for why emotional safety leaves the marriage is that we can tend to minimize. We can brush our spouse's pain off. We can say things like, "That's not a big deal," and then they don't feel hurt. Let me give you an example of that. Let's say that you tell your husband, "I really don't like the way you interrupted me the other day in front of your parents." And your husband says to you, "Come on, you're being sensitive. Nobody even noticed." Ouch, right? What do you learn from that? You were just dismissed, weren't you? Your feelings were minimized So you withdraw, and it teaches you that your feelings don't matter. So you stop bringing it up. You stop talking about it. A third way that emotional safety starts to dissipate in a marriage is when we weaponize, all right? If we bring up past vulnerabilities that our spouse has shared in future arguments, then trust collapses. So let's look at an example for that. Let's say that months ago your husband admitted to you, I'm feeling kind of insecure about my job. I I feel like my boss isn't happy with me, and I just feel like I'm not pulling I feel like maybe I'm not good enough for this job, like, I'm gonna get passed over, on the next potential promotion because 'cause I'm not good enough. And let's say that in the moment, you did a really good job of comforting him, but then during a heated argument later in the future, you snap at him and say, well, maybe if you weren't so insecure all the time, we wouldn't have these problems. Well, what does he learn from that? That his rawest confessions that come from that most vulnerable place in him that he shared with you, they can't be spoken. They're not safe because they're going to be used as future ammunition. I think about Jeff and and I've been guilty of this. My husband has tried to tell me in a few different ways, "Debbie, you do this." And I guess I didn't realize that this is what I was doing until, honestly, I was preparing this episode. Jeff is a trader, and he spends a lot of time working on becoming a better trader. He takes classes, he listens to the gurus, and he practices trading. But like so many people who are in who have this interest, it can be scary to spend money because you might lose it. And I go back and forth between comforting him and then being impatient with him. So what does Jeff learn? Impatient because I want him to go out there and lose money. Not too much, obviously, but I want him to learn. I want him to not be afraid to make mistakes. I think I'm helping him. I think that, I'm encouraging him. But then in another future argument, I might be really stressed and anxious about money. So he's feeling these mixed messages of like, make up your mind, Debbie. Do you want me to risk some money? But now you're afraid of, you know, how we're going to pay our bills this month, which is a irrational fear on my part. and and am I going is it safe for me to open up and talk to you about what I'm learning? And that, one day I say to you, I'm excited, I have this new trading method. And then the next day I admit that I'm a little bit scared, a little bit nervous about, trying it. And how are you going to react? Are you going to come at me and get frustrated and get impatient with me? That makes him not want to tell me, and he has shared that with me. He has told me that more than once. So this is something I need to work on. Have I created a safe place for Jeff to tell me, "Oh, this is scary stuff. I'm still gonna do it. I'm still learning." Have I made it safe for him to say it's scary, or do I just get impatient and frustrated? Another thing that removes emotional safety is inconsistency, also something I have to work on. If one day you're really receptive and the next day you're really reactive, then your spouse never knows what you'll get, which is kind of what I just shared with me and Jeff, right? So one evening you share with your husband, I'm really stressed about money lately. Okay, I can relate to this one. And Jeff listens calmly, nods, reassures me. But then the next time I bring it up, maybe he gets annoyed, okay, and says, "Why are you always complaining about money? You know, don't you think I'm already doing enough and working hard enough now. Jeff has never actually said that to me, and he wouldn't say that to me. But as an example, if one day he is reassuring and the next day he's not, okay, then what's gonna happen? I'm gonna hesitate each time going, "Well, which reaction am I gonna get? Which version of Jeff am I gonna get this time?" Or vice versa. Jeff could be saying that about me. Which version am I gonna get of Debbie every time I talk about my trading? Am I gonna get the sup supportive, encouraging Debbie, or am I gonna get the impatient, frustrated Debbie? So, public apology to my husband. I love you. Please, please, please keep going with your trading. And from this point forward, I am going to endeavor to always be supportive Debbie showing up with these conversations. What about you? Do you recognize that you have any of these things going on in your marriage? Do you struggle with criticism? Do you struggle with minimizing, weaponizing, being inconsistent? Chances are you do, because these things are pretty common. Okay, how do you build emotional safety? Well, the first thing you have to do is put more importance on listening than speaking your truth. I put air quotes around that because your truth isn't actually the truth. You do get that, right? We're really only just talking about perspective, and your perspective is different than his perspective or her perspective. And neither are necessarily a full representation of the truth. So listen first. Don't rush to fix, to jump in, to problem solve, to give critiques. Just be present. Just sit. Just hear and try to soak it in and understand what your spouse is really telling you. Ask questions. Clarify what you think you're hearing. Sometimes safety just looks like silence with the occasional supportive nod or empathetic noise or empathetic word. Wow. Maybe it's a phrase, a saying like, "Oh man, that sounds difficult." Then validate it. Validate what you're hearing. Even if you don't agree, you can still affirm. You can still say, I can get why you would feel that way. Wow, I if I were in your shoes, I'd be struggling with that too." Guard their heart, which really ultimately means guard their vulnerabilities. Never, ever use your spouse's confessions as ammunition later. Whatever is shared is sacred. It is your job to protect it always. And then be consistent over time. Safety is not built in a day. It's built through repetition, repeated moments of being reliable. That's how trust is built. The trust that this is a safe place. So I want you to ask yourself some questions over the next week or two. Does your spouse feel safe with you? You can point fingers. You can use this episode to go, yup, my spouse, they're wrong. They're not creating a safe place for me. But I want you to turn that around and point yourself back at you. Okay. Do they feel safe with you? When they share something vulnerable, do you really listen? Or do you defend and minimize and criticize? And what's one area that you could grow, improve, and becoming a safer place for your spouse? If this idea of emotional safety is resonating with you, this is what I do in Marriage in Bloom, my 6-month marriage intensive. So I got to put a plug in this at this point because it seems like an obvious place to do it. Because for 6 months minimum, sometimes we stretch it out a little longer, but for at least 6 months, I walk with you together on how to create the patterns that build safety and undo the patterns that are in your marriage right now that are eroding safety, to learn how to rebuild that trust and that connection and that intimacy step by step. So whether you're coming in as a couple or even if you're just starting solo, your spouse isn't interested in doing this, it doesn't mean you have to keep living in the same painful cycles. You can do it. You can get a head start on your spouse. Okay. So you can learn more by just simply going to debbiecaudle.com and just send me an email or give me a phone call. Both are available there, and I will chat with you about what this program looks like. At the end of the day, being a safe place doesn't mean you always get it right. I don't always get it right. It means instead that you you're committed again to making your spouse's heart a protected space. You're going to say the wrong thing at times. You're going to react poorly at times. But can you bring the real you to your spouse? Can your spouse bring their real self to you and have it be honored? Because when you feel emotionally safe, intimacy grows. And where intimacy grows, love flourishes. Thanks for joining me today on The High Ticket Woman. And as always, remember, you don't have to be perfect. You just have to stay teachable.